The fighting game genre has an incredible number of subgenres within it, the most recognized of which is generally called the traditional fighting game. Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat are good examples here, with their 2D side-to-side fighting and extensive arcade history. In the same vein, you have the full list of 2D fighters, which further splits into Air Dashers, SNK, Capcom, and so on. Rounding out the main branches are 3D fighters, such as Tekken, Soul Calibur, Virtua Fighter, or Dead or Alive. But in this video, we want to focus on a fighting game subgenre that at times can feel like an entirely different genre of its own: the platform fighter. Hey, this is Arya from TBS, and today we're going to go through DashFight's thoughts on the wide array of platform fighters that are out there now, their similarities and differences, and how their communities, for various factors, grew more competitive. As always, before we head into the video proper, make sure to subscribe to DashFight's channel right here on YouTube and ring the bell so you can be notified whenever a new video comes out. Our first stop is in the most light interpretation of platform fighters, the party game category. Although we've all heard that Super Smash Bros. Is meant to be a fun party game, and it is, there's no denying that over the past 3 decades, the series has grown well beyond that idea. But there are many other titles that we believe fit the party game category today. Games such as Towerfall and King of the Hat, which pitches opponents against one another in a contained arena. These games tend to lean heavily on the idea that their low barrier for entry, be it in terms of the hardware needed to play them and/or the actual cost of the title, will help bring more players into it, and then that those players will invite their friends, who then invite their friends, and so on and so forth. King of the Hat in particular takes from the simplistic approach of the style and continues to iterate upon it with its ranged gameplay that still requires players to get into riskier situations to stomp out their opponent's hat. It's one-hit kill style gameplay, where your main focus is on stomping your opponent's hat while keeping your own safe, creates high-risk situations. As a pick-up-and-go game with friends, it truly channels the chaotic energy a party title needs to have. But clearly, there's something more to it than just casual fun, as players have begun constructing the foundations of the game's meta. Each character, and therefore hat, has unique special abilities and different behaviors when being thrown. We can see some of the same elements at play in what most people would recognize as standard platform fighters. Think how in Brawlhalla, for example, each character has signature moves, even if they share the same basic weapon moves. That DNA is present in some capacity in King of the Hat as well. Like we said earlier, in the eyes of Nintendo, Smash Bros. At least started as a fun party game marketing-wise, but it wasn't until well after many years that its grassroots community began growing and unifying in its idea of competition. Platform fighters can be difficult to pass like that. If you've only played or been part of traditional fighting games, you'll have noticed how, throughout most interactions in those communities, there's a clear influence from the competitive side of those games. Things like tier lists, analysis videos, and a heavy emphasis on frame data, planning, strategy, and so on. Players in traditional fighting game titles often have an expectation that there's a road towards improvement, and that at the top of it, there's a group of players that have already mastered it, or at least gotten incredibly good at it. But in platform fighters, the further you go away from those core competitive titles, the less that influence takes root. It's hard to contemplate a world in which games like King of the Hat have hundreds of content creators analyzing the latest patch notes, for example, trying to figure out the hitboxes of all the hats, or making a competitive tier list for it. But it's not that crazy, right? At least if taken in a vacuum, it doesn't sound much more outlandish than people diving into the frame and hitbox data for Velma in Multiverses to see what she can do against Morty in a particular situation. It's all part of how a community perceives a game, and in turn, what language they choose to use. In fact, the early signs are there, as esports and general gaming spaces blend together for upcoming titles. The King of the Hat community already has made tournaments for themselves. They speak about optimal strategies, and yes, they even feature tier lists in their official Discord. For us, the line between competitive and casual is blurring, if there is a line at all, and perception might just be 80% of what makes reality in these cases. But we are curious, what do you think separates the competitive platform fighters we all know and love from the ones meant for partying with a few friends for a couple of rounds? Become DashFight's supporter on Patreon. Get early access to DashFight guides. Click the link in the description. The largest group of this subgenre, Brawlhalla, Rivals of Aether, and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, all fit into this category perfectly. In years past, these might have been called the old title of Smash clones, especially when PlayStation threw together the PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale in the early 2010s to bring together its massive library of IPs. That particular experiment failed, some would say, pretty badly, but it was perhaps ahead of its time. The most important distinction we can make between the party platform fighters and this category stems from a much clearer intention to pitch two players, or sometimes teams, against each other and have those battles be as balanced as possible with characters that have multiple attacks and combos. Obviously, balance is important, even in party games, but generally the focus is far more on avoiding the biggest exploits, not necessarily on fine-tuning the balance of those games to ensure every single character can compete with every other on an even footing. Games like Brawlhalla and Rivals of Aether also have something most party games don't: content creators willing to pour large amounts of time into their games. Whether they already were creators or became one because of the games themselves is largely irrelevant. They continue to supply that community with more interesting topics of discussion with each patch, DLC release, or simply by speaking about and engaging with the community that grows around them. Perhaps the biggest example of this in action is Ludwig, whose love for Super Smash Bros. Bleeds into much of the content he creates today. Even if he is no longer directly involved in that community in his day-to-day work as a content creator, he continues to supply the scene with viewership whenever he engages with it, be it as a tournament organizer or simply collaborating with other creators in the Smash community. If you flip the same coin, you can see Hungrybox, the largest day-to-day content creator for the Smash community. He has and continues to support many other platform fighters out there. This year alone, he's hosted events and competed in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl and Multiverses, to name just a few. But you probably wouldn't expect him to dip his toes into something like King of the Hat. So there is, at least in practice, a gap between these categories. Communities for these standard platform fighters have a casual audience, no doubt, but they also contain an established competitive scene, be it supported by the developers themselves, as seen with Brawlhalla's first-party circuit of tournaments, or one sprung up by players who enjoy and love the game's features, like Rivals of Aether being a consistent bracket in many locals, even if it's rarely the main bracket for said events. These games are not the titans of their genre, their communities don't often shift the trends of the entire scene by themselves, but they still spark the same energy that more comprehensive genre-defining games do. It's electrifying to see players compete at these games at the highest level. Once you realize how irrelevant discussions about whether players from one game could beat the ones from another, you can really start to appreciate the skill on display in both. The interplay between them and the even more competitive titles can often feel like a one-way street, wherein players will sometimes find their love of platform fighters in one of these titles and then go on to play in more competitive offerings as they release. And so we come to our last category, the competitive platform fighters. It's worth highlighting that these titles are not designed with pure competitiveness in mind. In fact, they have the incredibly difficult task of balancing the more casual elements with the more competitive ones. For us, the quintessential example is of course Super Smash Bros. From Melee to Ultimate, virtually every entry in the series has seen or currently sees widespread grassroots communities dedicated to its esports scene. So much so that, like traditional fighting games, there are services like Metafun, a service for paying for coaching sessions, and Start.gg, a tournament organizing platform. Neither of these exist just for Smash, but both are very heavily interlinked within the scene. The Smash community's relationship with its games is also very different from most other platform fighters. There's no lack of attachment to certain characters, but there's also a clear undercurrent of which characters are considered good and which are considered bad. As we said earlier in the video, perception makes a big difference, and ever since the release of Ultimate, it's clear that the scene has evolved to focus far more on the competitive side of things. Another game we want to add to this category, though purely for the potential we've seen, is Multiverses. The people behind the Warner Bros. Platform fighter have shown a very focused approach, and unlike Nintendo, they've gone to great lengths to support the growing multiversus competitive community. From a 2v2 bracket at EVO 2022 to consistently shouting out grassroots events on their Twitter, Multiversus is putting in the groundwork to encourage players to take up the game not only for gameplay, but also because, if they want to, there's a wealth of competitive offerings out there. Time will tell if Warner Bros.' proactive approach to esports, with the continual engagement of content creators and fans alike, proves a successful model. As for Nintendo's dry approach, well, some of the bricks in the wall seem to be falling, as Panda has been able to bring the publisher in for an official tournament circuit. So where do you think your favorite platform fighters stand in the spectrum? And do you believe Multiversus' ambitious and rapid growth can be sustained in the future to give Smash Bros. An actual competitor in the top level of the scene? Let us know in the comments, we love to hear your thoughts. This has been Arya from That Blasted Salami. As always, have a great day everyone, take care, and see you next time.